a debacle like COVID was. These are all the reasons why I don't believe it was an act of war. Could they have been developing biological antigens, biological weapons, or biological defense? They could have been, possibly. Everything's a possibility, right? I would even say that could be that could be in the place of like 40 to 70% probable. But we don't have any information to support that. Maybe it's out there and we just haven't seen it. But for me, when I take a look at all the data that I do have, I see the history of swine flu, bird flu. I see the history of how they operate in Hong Kong, and I see the fact that coronavirus was handled like a freaking disaster. That does not strike me as an intentional act of war.
Why do you think there was no repercussions?
So my guess is that the reason that we haven't seen repercussions is because of what happened when it hit the democratic world. Let's just look at the United States. It's easy for us to remember the United States. It first hit the United States when Donald Trump was president. Mm-hmm. And Trump made a big deal out of saying, we don't know what it is. It's a virus. Don't panic. Right? It was don't panic, don't panic, don't panic, as liberal media and the opposite viewpoint to the Republican Party was panicking, counting. Once you start counting sick people and counting beds and counting dead, it didn't serve us in Vietnam. It didn't serve us in Afghanistan or Iraq. Why would we think it's going to serve us during the coronavirus outbreak, right? So now everybody's worried about numbers without having any context for those numbers, without actually doing the deep research. If you remember how many bad medical journal articles came out, how much what was it? It was like the American Center for Disease Control. The CDC came out and said early on that there's no evidence that coronavirus can spread from human to human. Right? Do you remember that? They made a freaking meme out of it with like a little boy on his grandpa's shoulders or some garbage. They were so wrong. So in the middle of all this, then we have an election year and a change in president. And then once coronavirus was deemed not a superbug, then it became a political issue. Once it became a political issue, somebody had to run on a platform about coronavirus. Biden won. He had to do something about coronavirus because he had just won on that platform. So he pours money into vaccines and he forces vaccine among government employees. And we all know what happened from there. Essentially, the United States government got behind the idea that coronavirus was a major issue. Mm-hmm. And every other first world country followed our lead. There's no walking that back. You can't fund research for a vaccination on short notice. You can't create policy around a virus that you then later on say, my mistake, you guys. It really wasn't as bad as we thought it was going to be. We have a pretty solid plan to take care of the high-risk individuals. Maybe we shouldn't have put so much money into a race for a vaccine. Maybe we did some things wrong. The government can't say that. They can't admit their mistakes. But what they can do is try to push to focus us, the American public, on something else. That's why I think they were never held accountable. Because if the United States government was to say, China, your bad health practices made this happen, that just opens the door to China being like, well, your bad decision about these health practices made it into something that it wasn't, right? Did our labs potentially leak a virus? Yes.
Well, I mean,
our virus
if you rewind,
No.
if you do rewind, China had an overreaction. If we had an overreaction, then they definitely had an overreaction because they were welding apartment doors shut. Yeah. You know what I mean? And they were, arresting people, had people in mop suits. They were disinfecting factories. Mm-hmm. And so as severe as the response was here in the U.S., it was more severe there. So
the difference is
how could they claim that?
Nobody followed China. China did what China did. Nobody took action until we took action. Mm-hmm. After the United States started locking people up locking up businesses and forcing people to work from home and shutting down travel. After that, that's when you saw everybody else start to really apply the policies. I remember I was in the Middle East at the time. I was in the UAE at the time. Things went crazy in China, and the UAE was undecided how it was going to respond. lots of Chinese were coming to and from Dubai and to and from Abu Dhabi, but the Emirates didn't want to shut down all of their economy until they knew something was significant, right? Plus, they have a very small population and a really high level of medical technicians, so they didn't run into the risk, the oversaturation of hospitals like we had in the United States. But once the U.S. president made an issue out of it, then the Emiratis made an issue out of it. And that's how things kind of tumbled. So China, you're right, China overreacted by our standards, but they reacted in exactly the way you would expect a surveillance police state, to behave. Welding people into buildings and doing other inhumane things.
Yeah, and then, on top of that, one of your responses when I asked, why don't you think this was an act of war, is because they released on their own people. But we know they don't treat their people like we treat our people. They have slavery still. Your shoes are probably made from it. Our phones are made from, everything's made from it, and they have an overpopulation problem. So I don't think it would be out of the realm to say maybe this was some type of a population control thing for China, or maybe they did release it, upon the world to create everything that happened.
You're, again, considering that everything is a possibility, it becomes a question of probability. Mm-hmm. In my estimate of China, they don't often make moves that have more loss than benefit. And they've lost significantly since COVID came out. We all got smart to their role in supply chain management or supply chain control. We all got smart to their lack of human rights, their control of movement. Those are human rights abuses, right? They could have done that for decades, both of those for decades, without us ever even noticing it.
Yeah.
Coronavirus, it pulled the veil back. Not to mention the fact that then after the United States laid off of COVID policy and Europe started pulling back COVID policy, the Chinese continued a very strict zero tolerance policy. Why would they do that, right? Is there the potential that they were trying to essentially kill off their older generation and kill off their weaker, sicker generation because we know it targets immunocompromised individuals? Of course, there's a possibility, but probability-wise, they lost much more coming out of COVID than they gained. That doesn't strike me as a calculated, intentional move.
Okay. It's just, it's hard for me to believe it wasn't when all these other things, lead to their end game, their goal.
So I don't think that, I think you're dead on about their end game. I think you're dead on about all of the multifaceted things that China's doing, for sure. The only place where I'm divergent is in thinking that COVID was intentional. For all we know, it was a biological weapon that they were planning to release when they executed their endgame. Perhaps that's true. We don't know. All I'm saying is that I am feeling like the higher probability reason that I am saying that it is low probability that they intentionally released it in 2019 in Wuhan among their own people for some strategic benefit. I feel like that was a mistake. Either a mistake that happened naturally or a mistake that was fabricated in the lab. It was still a mistake. That's all I'm saying, because all this stuff is legit.
Hey everybody, I'm Sean Ryan. Click here to subscribe to the Sean Ryan Show YouTube channel for the hottest and most compelling interviews that you will not see anywhere else. I've also made a playlist of all the previous SRS episodes so they're easy to find. You can find that right here.